Let me tell you how this started. We were sitting at the kitchen table in our house in Sacramento, California, on a Sunday afternoon in October, drinking coffee, and I was showing Ronnie, that's my husband, Ronaldo, who has gone by Ronnie for the 41 years I've known him. I was showing him a listing for a retirement community in Roseville. Nice place, single-story homes, a community pool, a clubhouse, golf carts, which neither of us plays golf, but which seemed charming in photographs. I had printed the brochure out and highlighted 3 floor plans I liked and was explaining, patiently, the merits of the corner unit with the extra half bathroom. And Ronnie looked at the brochure. Then he looked at me. Then he said, in the particular calm voice he uses when he has already made a decision and is only now informing me of it, "Linda, I want to go home." I thought he meant I should drive him to his brother's house. That's how slow I was on the uptake. He didn't mean his brother's house. He meant the Philippines, the island of Cebu specifically, the city of Mandaue, where he was born 68 years ago and where his mother and 2 of his sisters and approximately 47 cousins still lived, and where he had not spent more than 3 weeks at a time in 39 years because we had built our life in California, and that was where our life was. I put down my coffee. I looked at my highlighted brochure. I said, very calmly, "Ronnie, no." He smiled the smile he has been smiling at me for 41 years, the one that means he is not arguing because he has already won, and he said, "Let's just talk about it. This is the story of what happened after. Let's just talk about it. I need to give you some background because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Linda. I am 66 years old, born and raised in Fresno, California. I am the daughter of a hardware store owner and a woman who made the best pie in the San Joaquin Valley and was modest about neither. I have never lived anywhere except California. I met Ronnie in 1983 at a hospital in Sacramento, where I was a registered nurse and he was a respiratory therapist who had arrived from the Philippines 4 years earlier on a work visa and who had, within 3 minutes of our introduction at a staff meeting, made me laugh hard enough that I almost spilled my coffee on my scrubs. We were married in 1984. We raised 2 children, our daughter Melissa, who lives in Portland, and our son James, who lives 20 minutes from us in Sacramento, and is the reason I had 17 good arguments for staying in California, all of which I deployed at various points over the following 6 months. We bought a house in 1991. We paid it off in 2018. We had a life, a real and full and rooted life, and I had assumed that life would simply continue into retirement, the way a road continues past a sign that says, "You've entered a new county." Same road, new label. What I had failed to account for was Ronnie's plan, which he had apparently been developing quietly for some time, and had chosen a Sunday afternoon in October to introduce to me alongside the second cup of coffee. Let me tell you about Ronnie's plan, as it emerged over the following 6 months of what he called discussion, and I called negotiation, and what was, in reality, a patient, affectionate, entirely one-sided campaign that he had already won before it began. He wanted to go home to Cebu, not for a vacation, to live, to be close to his mother, who was 89 and still sharp, but not going to be either of those things indefinitely, to be near his sisters, to be in the place that had made him before California had made him something additional. He talked about it the way people talk about something they've been carrying quietly for a long time and have finally decided to put down in front of you, carefully, with a lot of detail, with the particular patience of a man who knew his wife well enough to understand that she would need time and evidence, and who was prepared to provide both in whatever quantities were required. I had objections. I had many objections. I had objections organized by category. There were the practical objections, the grandchildren, James's kids, who I was not prepared to see on a screen instead of in my kitchen. There were the medical objections. I had a rheumatologist I trusted, and a system I knew, and I was not 25 years old, and neither was Ronnie. There were the cultural objections, which I am a little embarrassed to admit now, but will tell you honestly, because this is that kind of story. I had never lived anywhere except California. I didn't speak Cebuano. I didn't know how anything worked there, and the prospect of being a foreigner in my own retirement felt, frankly, terrifying. Ronnie listened to every objection. He did not dismiss any of them. He said, "Those are fair. Let's go for 3 months and then decide." I said 3 months was not deciding. 3 months was a vacation. He said, "Then it's a vacation. Come on a vacation with me." I knew what he was doing. I went anyway, because 41 years of marriage teaches you when to spend your resistance on something that matters. We flew to Cebu in January, which Ronnie informed me was the best month because the weather was cooler and the Christmas season had just ended, so his family's festivities would be winding down to a level I could absorb without being completely overwhelmed. I appreciated this consideration and told him so, which he accepted with the grace of a man storing credit for future use. His family met us at the airport. When I say family, I want to be clear about the scale. There were 14 people holding a hand-painted sign that said, "Welcome home, Ronnie and Linda," in letters that suggested genuine enthusiasm and no particular concern for uniform sizing. His mother, Nanai Caring, who was 4'11" and 90 pounds, and had the quiet authority of someone who had raised 7 children through difficult decades and was not impressed by anything less than genuine character. She walked straight to Ronnie and held his face in her 2 small hands and said something in Cebuano that I didn't need translated. Then she turned to me and took my hands and said, in careful English, "I have wanted to meet you for a long time. My son loves you very much. Come, you must be hungry." That was my welcome to the Philippines. Come, you must be hungry. It turned out to be the essential sentence of the entire country, repeated in varying forms by every person I would meet for the next 3 months. The first week was, I want to be honest, a lot. The traffic in Cebu City operates on principles I have still not fully decoded. A philosophy of motion that I can only describe as optimistic, where proximity to other vehicles is understood as a suggestion rather than a hazard. The heat was real, and January, Ronnie's supposedly cooler month, still made Sacramento's worst summer feel like a polite suggestion. The noise, the colour, the density of everything. It required a constant low-grade alertness that was exhausting in a way I hadn't expected. By the end of the first week, I was sleeping 9 hours a night and still tired, and I was taking notes in a small journal I'd brought, and the notes were things like, "Ask Ronnie about the traffic thing. Ask Ronnie about the roosters. Why are there so many roosters?" Ronnie, meanwhile, was becoming a different person in front of my eyes. This is the part I didn't expect and couldn't have predicted. At home in Sacramento, Ronnie was, and I say this with complete love, a relatively quiet man. Thoughtful. Funny when you knew him, but contained in the way that people who have lived as immigrants for decades can become contained, operating with a certain careful restraint. Here, in Cebu, at his mother's house, surrounded by his sisters and their husbands, and what seemed like a rotating cast of cousins and neighbours and people I couldn't fully account for, he was loud. He laughed with his whole body. He talked over people, and was talked over in return, and nobody minded. He sat in the kitchen with Nanai Caring for hours, while I couldn't understand a word of what they were saying. And he looked, simply and completely, like a man who had found the part of himself that California had asked him to keep quiet for 39 years. I sat across the kitchen table watching him talk and laugh and be entirely, recognizably, deeply himself, and I felt 2 things simultaneously. profound happiness for him, and the particular loneliness of being the only person in the room who doesn't understand what's funny. I want to tell you about the month I nearly made Ronnie take me home, not because I'm proud of it, but because I think it's the most important part of the story and the part people like me need to hear honestly. It was week 4. The novelty had worn off, or not worn off exactly, but settled into something more permanent, which meant I had to start actually living in it rather than visiting it. My Cebuano was essentially non-existent. I could say salamat, thank you, and magkano, how much, and a phrase Ronnie had taught me that he claimed meant good morning, but which I later discovered meant something closer to good heavens, you startled me, which explained some of the reactions I'd been getting at the market. The family was wonderful. I want to be clear about that. Every single person was warm and welcoming and made genuine effort to include me. But inclusion, when you don't share a language, has a ceiling. There were long meals where conversation flowed around me in Cebuano, and I would eat and smile and nod and feel, very specifically, like a guest at my own retirement. Ronnie would translate when he remembered to, and he usually remembered. But sometimes the conversation moved too fast, or he got caught up in it, and I would sit for stretches of time in a room full of people who loved my husband and were tolerating me, kindly, and I felt the particular specific loneliness of being surrounded by warmth you can't quite reach. One afternoon, I excused myself from a family gathering and went and sat on the small porch of the house we were staying in, and I called my daughter Melissa. I said, "Melissa, I don't think I can do this." She asked me what I meant. I said, "Your father is home here. I can see it. He's completely home. And I don't know how to be home somewhere that isn't mine." Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mum, how long did it take you to feel at home in Sacramento after you got married?" I thought about it. I said probably 2 years. She said, "You've been there 4 weeks." I did not tell her that was an extremely unhelpful observation, because it was also true. What changed things wasn't a single moment. It was an accumulation of small things over the following weeks, the way the real changes usually come. It was Nanai caring, teaching me to make chicken adobo and not laughing, or not much, when I added too much vinegar the first time. It was a neighbor named Tita Nene, which I eventually understood was a title of affection and not actually her name, who started sitting with me in the mornings over coffee specifically because she had figured out I was overwhelmed and decided, without being asked and without making anything of it, to be a companion. She spoke almost no English, and I spoke almost no Cebuano, and we sat together most mornings in the warmth with our cups and communicated in the way women have always communicated when language fails, which is a kind of patient presence that doesn't require words and is sometimes more honest than words anyway. It was the fiesta, the barangay fiesta, which arrived about 6 weeks into our stay with the force of a weather event, decorations appearing overnight, a sound system assembled in the street with what seemed like unnecessary but impressive speed, tables being set up on the road in front of every house, cooking that had been happening for 3 days, releasing smells that travelled down entire blocks. Ronnie's family had a table, and I was at it, and there was lechon, roasted pig, crispy-skinned, extraordinary in a way that I tried to describe to Melissa later and could not. And there was pancit and kare-kare, and a dessert called halo halo that is shaved ice and sweet beans and fruit and purple yam, ice cream and leche flan all in one glass, and that sounds insane, and is the best thing I have ever eaten in the heat. And there were speeches and songs and dancing that I watched from the edge of things until Ronnie's youngest sister Mari grabbed my hand and pulled me in. And I danced badly in the street in the dark with 40 people I mostly didn't know. and I laughed in a way I hadn't laughed in months. And Ronnie stood on the side watching me with an expression I recognized from our wedding 41 years ago. That was the night I stopped counting the weeks until we went home. We went home to Sacramento in April. 3 months, as agreed. I walked back into our house in Sacramento, the one we'd paid off, the one I'd been defending as the correct location for our retirement. And I stood in the kitchen and thought about the highlighted brochure for the Roseville retirement community and felt, quietly but completely, that something had shifted. Ronnie didn't say a word. He made coffee. He handed me a cup. He sat down at the kitchen table and waited. I lasted 6 days. On the 7th day, I sat down across from him and said, "Tell me the real numbers. What does it actually cost to live there?" He had the spreadsheet ready. Of course he had the spreadsheet ready. He had probably had it ready since October. Here is what we found. A house, not an apartment. A house, 3 bedrooms, a small garden, in a quiet neighborhood in Mandaue, 15 minutes from his family, ran between 15,000 and 18,000 pesos a month. At current exchange rates, that is between $265 and $320. In Sacramento, our property taxes alone on the house we owned outright were $6,200 a year. The house itself, if we sold it, would give us a cushion that changed the math of everything. Our combined retirement income, Ronnie's pension from 31 years as a respiratory therapist, my reduced Social Security, and the small amount I'd put away, came to just over $3,800 a month. In Sacramento, that was comfortable, but not free. In Cebu, that number was, without exaggeration, more than sufficient for a life that included a housekeeper, regular family dinners, medical care that cost a fraction of what we'd paid in California, and the occasional trip that had previously felt like a luxury. I looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then I looked at Ronnie. I said, "You've been sitting on this spreadsheet for how long?" He said, very carefully, that he had been doing some preliminary research. I asked him to define preliminary. He admitted it had been approximately 4 years. I decided to be more impressed than annoyed, which is a marital skill I have developed over decades and which I recommend. We sold the house in Sacramento in the fall. I will not pretend that was uncomplicated. I cried on the last day, standing in the empty kitchen the way you do, and Ronnie stood with me and didn't say anything, because he knew that sometimes the right answer is just to stand there. I said goodbye to the house the way you say goodbye to a version of your life that served you fully and is now complete. Then we drove to James's house for a last dinner with the grandchildren, and I held my grandson for a long time before I let him go, and that was harder than the house. That will always be harder than anything. We landed in Cebu on a Wednesday afternoon. Nanay Karing was at the airport with Mari and 4 cousins and a sign that just said, "Finally," which I thought was accurate. We have been here 2 years. I want to tell you what it is now, the ordinary shape of it, because the ordinary is the point. My Cebuano is no longer embarrassing. It is still not good, but it is no longer a source of comedy at the market. Or it is a source of comedy in the warmer way, the way that includes me in the joke instead of making me the subject of it. Nanay Karing has made me her project in the kitchen, and I have learned to make adobo, sinigang, and a version of kare-kare she has graded as acceptable, which from a woman who raised 7 children is a significant endorsement. We have a house in a neighborhood where everyone knows Ronnie's family and has extended that knowledge to include me. Our housekeeper, a woman named Virgie, has worked for the family in various capacities for 12 years and regards my attempts at cooking with the diplomatic neutrality of someone who knows better and is too wise to say so directly. I have a market I go to on Tuesday and Friday mornings, where I have my vendors. the way you accumulate vendors over time, people who know what you want before you ask. I have a coffee shop near the university where I go on Thursday mornings with my book, and the woman who runs it has started having my order ready when she sees me coming through the door, which is one of the small specific pleasures that makes a place feel like yours. And I have Tita Nene, who still sits with me most mornings on the porch, whose English has improved as my Cebuano has improved, so that our conversations have gradually become more verbal and less simply present, and who remains the person I would call first if something went wrong on this side of the world. She is not a replacement for Melissa or for my friends in Sacramento. She is something additional, something I did not know to look for. A friendship that arrived not because I sought it, but because someone paid attention and made room. The hard parts are real, and I won't minimize them. I miss James and the grandchildren with an ache that video calls soften but don't cure. The heat remains a negotiation, particularly in the months before the rains come. There are days when I feel the foreignness of everything sharply, when I make the wrong assumption about how something works and am reminded, not unkindly, that I am still learning. The bureaucracy of staying legally in the country as an American spouse requires paperwork that I have decided to handle with patience and a very good visa agent rather than with frustration, which would cost more. And there are moments, quiet ones, when I look at Ronnie and understand that this was always his plan, that the Sunday afternoon with the highlighted brochure was never going to end the way I'd intended, and that he had known that with the particular patience of a man who has loved the same woman for 41 years, and understands that she will eventually come around if given sufficient evidence. Last month, Melissa came to visit with her husband and their 2 children. I watched her step out of the airport into the heat and make the same face I had made 2 years ago, the face of someone recalibrating everything they thought they understood about temperature. I watched her walk through the palenque on her second morning and stop in front of the fish stalls the way I had stopped, unable to look away from the sheer abundance and freshness of everything. On her last evening, we sat on the porch after dinner. Melissa and her husband, and Ronnie and me and Nane caring, who had fallen asleep in her chair in the particular totality of the very old and was snoring softly with complete dignity. And Melissa looked out at the neighborhood in the warm dark and said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "That it was like this. You described it, but you didn't. Why didn't you tell me it was actually like this?" I told her I hadn't known how to, exactly. That some things need to be stood in rather than described. She nodded. She watched the street for a while. Then she said, "Dad was right. I said I was aware. I told her not to tell him I'd said so." She laughed, and then, more quietly, she said, "You seem happy, Mom, like actually happy. I didn't realize how long it had been since you seemed actually happy." I thought about the Sunday afternoon in October, with the highlighted brochure and the Roseville retirement community, with the corner unit and the extra half bathroom. I thought about the 6 months of objections I had organized by category. I thought about week 4 in Cebu, when I had sat on the porch and called Melissa and said I didn't think I could do it. Then I looked over at Ronnie, who was telling Nane Caring's sleeping form something in Cebuano that was clearly very funny to him, and who looked, as he had looked from the first week here, like a man who had found the part of himself that 39 years away had asked him to keep quiet. I said, "I am. I actually am." Ronnie looked over and caught me saying it. He raised his eyebrows. His version of "I told you so," the one he has the grace not to say out loud after 41 years of practice. I raised mine back. My version of "I know. You don't have to. This is retirement. It is not the corner unit in Roseville with the extra half bathroom. It is a porch in Cebu in the warm dark with a sleeping mother-in-law and a husband who has finally, fully come home, and a woman from Fresno, California, who came along for what she thought was a 3-month vacation and has not, for a single day since, wanted to leave. Some plans are better than the ones you made yourself. It just takes a while to admit it. 41 years in, I'm still learning that. And I think that's exactly as it should be.